In the year 47 BCE, Julius Caesar stood at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. He craned his neck upwards, squinting in the Egyptian sun, and was overcome by an emotion not often felt by a man of Caesar's stature. The great Caesar was humbled. He was full of questions for his Egyptian guides. How did the builders get the bricks all the way up to the top? What were their methods? Why were these monuments constructed? The guides were eager to please the great Caesar, but the truth was that they didn't know. Nobody knew, just as nobody today can say with absolute certainty. The pyramids were relics of an ancient past, and its secrets were lost, buried beneath the shifting sands of the endless desert that surrounded them. The story of Caesar in the desert is really just to illustrate that the time that we think of as ancient history had an ancient history all of its own. This is a period that we call the Bronze Age. If the classical Greeks shared their world with the gods, then this is when the people of Greece would have lived alongside Kronos and the Titans. This is when Moses parted the Red Sea and led the Israelites out of Egypt. This is when Agamemnon sent his Mycenaeans to Troy to bring back Helen. This is the time of Solomon, of Gilgamesh, of Babylon, of Uruk. And now you're saying to yourself, yes, this is all the stuff that may or may not have actually happened. Well, I will tell you what did happen. The Bronze Age lasted more than 2,000 years, and then, upon the arrival of a mysterious group known only as the Sea Peoples, came crashing down to rubble, all within the span of about 30 years. Why this happened and the identity of the Sea Peoples is the subject of this video. But first, let's establish the true scale of this pre-ancient world. Let's talk about the name the Bronze Age. Those of you who've played Age of Empires will know that the Bronze Age was succeeded by a period we call the Iron Age. This certainly establishes iron as a superior metal for making products, which it is, today. But at the end of the Bronze Age, the few societies who could work with iron still could not make weapons or utensils that rivaled bronze. The method of adding carbon to produce steel was centuries away, and without this addition, or having developed the practice of forging, essentially hitting cooling iron with a hammer, iron products were brittle and prone to breaking. So why the transition? Bronze is an alloy made from two elements, copper and tin. Copper is relatively common, even in the ancient world. Tin is not. The largest repositories of tin are in modern Afghanistan. And if you were a Bronze Age Greek, the tin in your bronze weapons, your cookware, but also the handles and hinges on the doors of your house, all would have travelled from mines in Afghanistan. Of course, much like today, this remained mostly unbeknownst to the consumer. The reason why humans go from being a species who use bronze to being a species who does not use bronze is because this network of trade, what today we might call globalization, completely collapsed. The sophistication of the global trade networks established during the Bronze Age can be seen in the Uluburun Shipwreck. This ship was discovered just 50 meters off the coast of Uluburun in Turkey in 1982. It contained cargo from every corner of the Bronze Age world, but the scope of Bronze Age trade can be seen in just 3 materials on board this one ship. The Uluburun Shipwreck contained tin, which we already established is from Afghanistan and would have been a staple of Bronze Age trade, amber, which would have come from the Baltic Sea region, drawing a line of 6,000 kilometers from Afghanistan, and most shockingly, ebony, which needed to travel from tropical Central Africa about 8,000 kilometers distance from both of these points, respectively. A triangle made of these 3 points has an area of about 15 million square kilometers. For perspective, Europe, the United States, and China each have an area smaller than 10 million square kilometers. This was the world that was constructed by the civilizations of the Bronze Age over a time span of more than 2,000 years, and then it all came crashing down in less than half of a human lifetime. So what happened? Well, now we have arrived at the mystery that has confounded historians for millennia. I mentioned before the Sea Peoples. Their arrival is undisputedly the event that triggers the collapse in 1177 BCE. They arrived from the Mediterranean, as their name suggests, but as we will see, one explanation for any part of their arrival would be an oversimplification. In fact, the entire saga of the Sea Peoples' arrival is an enigma which has evaded any kind of solution. That is, until recently, but we'll get to that later. It's not that the Sea Peoples are a completely unknown alien civilization who attacked out of the blue, although that would be interesting for sure. It's the fact that some of them are known well to the civilizations of the Mediterranean, and some are alien. It's that at least one of these groups who were well known, the Sherden, who arrived in Egypt, are depicted in Egyptian art fighting alongside the Egyptians as mercenaries, just a generation previously. At a glance, one might say that this looks like a confederation of peripheral states that have coordinated to take down the regional powers, much like the confederation of the Mongol tribes achieved by Genghis Khan. In fact, this is how the invasion is described by Ramses III in one of the most descriptive accounts of the arrival of the Sea Peoples. But this description is completely contrary to archaeological evidence, most notably that the Sea Peoples arrived with their families and livestock, not as conquerors, but as settlers. Why would they take this risk if they had coordinated this attack? To invade a foreign country with your entire family suggests that you're on the run from some greater danger, and on the balance of things, you'll take your chances with the invasion. Further evidence only adds further mystery. There are the Ugarit letters, undelivered tablets found in the ruins of Ugarit, a Hittite city in modern Turkey, destroyed in the collapse, never to be inhabited since. These letters speak of waves of chaotic arrivals by sea that overwhelmed with sheer force of numbers. One of these accounts describes an invasion not by sea, but by land. Did the people we called the Sea Peoples also arrive to Turkey via the Caucasus, coming from modern-day Russia? At least one of these groups, the Peliset, which would have been translated to Philistine in the classical era, but whom we now call the Palestinians, seems to have been able to settle peacefully, even founding the city of Gaza. Maybe this was tolerated because the Peliset provided a natural barrier between the Egyptians and the Canaanites, and their lineage was spared destruction by a quirk of historical geopolitics. In any case, we have a situation where the ancient world is inundated by violent maritime invaders. Only they're not all invaders, they're not all violent, and they don't all necessarily arrive by sea. How does one make sense of these pieces of data, much of which is unreliable and clouded by the panic of the moment in which they were recorded? How can we build a coherent story out of this? One thing that archaeologists and historians do to solve problems like this is build a model of everything that is known, weighing up primary resources to arrive at something reliable, and taking into account all of the information in the region from the time. Well, what if that model wasn't big enough? What if it wasn't close to big enough? What if it didn't take into account an event that occurred somewhere between 1180 and 1140 BCE, in the frozen tundra of Iceland, some 5,000 kilometers from the shores of Egypt. So far we've discussed the Bronze Age people of the Mediterranean and the Levant. If you're raised into a biblical tradition, or have perhaps ever taken an interest in Homeric epics like the Iliad, you will have a sense for what this time evokes. You might see the Pillars of Hercules, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, or the Pyramids of Egypt, adorned in white marble, their gold apexes reflecting the sun. You might have a sense for the civic life of these people. You might imagine markets bustling with trade and opportunity. You might picture scribes taking shade in city streets, stabbing cuneiform symbols into still soft slabs of clay. But as we turn our attention north, you might find that the sound of urban markets goes quiet, and the smell of freshly baked bread leaves your senses. You attempt to conjure an image that encapsulates the lives of the Northern Europeans of this time, but nothing comes easily. Maybe you see artifacts of Celtic or Viking culture, but then you remember that this is long before Dagda, Odin, or Jupiter, and the Vikings would not appear for another 2,000 years. The reason that the Northern Europeans disappear from our storytelling into a dense, Neolithic fog is that they were not recording their thoughts as writing, so all we have is archaeological evidence as well as the observations of those who were. Despite being pre-writing, there is actually much that we do know about these people. They lived in tribal groups, usually between 1 and 200 people, bound together by ties of marriage or blood. They spoke a range of languages that could probably be plotted on a spectrum, from Gallic Celtic sounding to Germanic sounding to Slavic sounding, but all converging on a single root language that we call Proto-Indo-European. In Scandinavia, they lived in wooden longhouses, with up to 30 people in a single house that was shared with livestock. The house made for a cultural substrata to the tribe, with each house having a head, but one of those heads of house also acting as a tribal chieftain, chosen for his bravery and generosity. They were agricultural. The farmer class was the backbone of the Nordic society of the time. And they were warriors. Archaeological evidence shows that their camps had fortifications and hill forts, signaling the ever-present spectre of war. They engaged in trade with other European societies, and above all things, the material they prized most was, incredibly, bronze. That's right, they used bronze. Not just using it, but revering it for its utilitarian properties. This expands the scope of the Bronze Age trade network even further, out to the wild, frozen north of Scandinavia. The most likely scenario is that traders buying amber in the Baltic regions transacted in bronze, and the desirable metal found its way into the lives of the Northern Europeans. A common form factor for these bronze offerings were effigies of the sun, suggesting that perhaps the sun was worshipped by the northern societies as a kind of pagan deity. Interestingly, the stereotypical image of the Viking, with the horned helmet worn in battle, never really existed in the Viking culture, but it did exist among societies of the Nordic Bronze Age. The horned helmets were actually cast in bronze, and they even made figurines in bronze of a human figure wearing the helmet. The helmet wasn't worn in battle, but rather it was ceremonial and probably reserved for a tribal chief, or maybe a shaman. The presence of humans with horns or antlers that we see in Nordic art would correlate with traditions of shamanism the world over. It must also be noted their proximity to the Uralic Sami people, who engaged in the ritualistic, psychedelic use of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. So maybe we can imagine our Nordic Scandinavian tribe spending the long winters in refuge from the cold, telling stories around an indoor fire, taking tentative bites of the sacred mushroom while their animals sleep soundly, and heroic visions of their ancestors begin to appear all around them. This is, of course, conjecture, but the next part of this story is not. One day, during a period of long, bountiful summers, a curious rain begins to fall on our Scandinavian tribe. It's not wet, rather it's dry and black, like the pit of a fire that had long since gone cold. The black rain falls for days, turning the sun a hazy red. Days turns to months, and winter arrives. A bitterly cold winter that few in the tribe have experienced in their lifetime. They make do with the supplies that they saved over summer, but when spring doesn't arrive, concern turns to panic. This time, they don't even see the sun, just a blood-red halo, insignificant against the blackened sky. Another winter is upon them, more brutal than the last. Why had their sun god forsaken them? What had they done to anger him? They know that if spring doesn't come another time, they will have to pack their belongings, leave behind the only home they have ever known, and venture south. The story of the next 2 decades is told in the rings of ancient European oak trees. These rings each faithfully record the solar activity across a full year. Trees that have been preserved for thousands of years show a haunting consistency. A period of 18 years with no growth, no sun. As if the world went dark for 2 decades. This pattern repeats, from Europe all the way to pine trees in California preserved in tar. In Greenland, seasonal ice sheets corroborate this testimony with a layer of rhyolitic ash, like a bookmark in the story of our geological history. And in Iceland, soil samples show deposits of volcanic tephra that covered almost the entirety of the island. It all points to a single event, undeniable yet impossible in its impact. The eruption of Mount Hekla in the late Bronze Age of antiquity, the third in geological records, referred to unceremoniously as Hekla III. It threw more than 7 cubic kilometers of volcanic material into the air and discharged a poisonous layer of sulfur that blocked out the sun, turning the day to night and ushering in 18 years of winter. The people of Northern Europe, living different lives, speaking different languages, unaware of each other's existences, would have all shared the experience of a strange, black rain, followed by the rapid disintegration of their way of life. No food could grow. The water turned a toxic shade of grey. A gathering landslide of people, but also birds and forest animals, all guided by the same instinct, must have started the long march south, towards sun, towards life. The nature of people was quickly put to the test as it became apparent that only one law existed, perhaps the only law that has ever existed, masked as it was by the delicate veil of civilization. Survive. Survive at all costs. Each wave of refugees must have slammed into the next, who would quickly contract the plague of hysteria. Land-dwelling tribes would have descended on southern ports, forcing seafarers into the desperate search for new shores. Baltic traders must have braved the harrowing 5,000-kilometer overland journey in an effort to reach Anatolia. And by the time the first wave hit, the civilizations of the Mediterranean had just enough time to chronicle the invasion of the Sea Peoples before their own 2,000-year summer turned cold forever.
I ask you first, Corinthian stranger, is this the man you mean?
In the tradition of Greek tragedy, the defining characteristic of a tragic protagonist is hubris. Hubris is defined as arrogance, to the point that it is in defiance of the gods themselves. In the 20th century, after acquiring the godlike destructive power of atomic weapons, US Air Force General Curtis LeMay is said to have coined the idiom to send someone back to the Stone Age.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
This is fitting, because in the late Bronze Age, after the humans of antiquity had built monuments that scratched the heavens, it all came crashing down, suddenly and violently. In 1177 BCE, for all our hubris, the gods sent us, quite literally, back to the Stone Age.